Go preparing. Hello there and welcome to Celebrate Southern Africa. My name is Dawn Denton and today I am speaking to Chris Thompson, who wrote this fabulous book. And Chris is now based on the Isle of Man, which is a very different location to where this book is based. Hi, Chris, and welcome to Celebrate.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me.
I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this book. And I read a little bit at night because I get tired. And then the next night I'm like, oh, I have to go back 3 pages because I lost it because I was tired. Last weekend, I sat in the garden. I forgot all my chores. I didn't care. I had to read this story. Where did the whole idea of this series, because this is your second, isn't it?
Yeah. The series started with a book called Tommo and the Pangolin Poachers, because I realized a while ago that the pangolins were becoming targeted, and it's only fairly recently since that Namibian lady had her program on TV where they showed her bringing up an orphan. In fact, I've been in touch with her and I'm hoping to get a picture of a pangolin from her to put on the cover of that book when it's being published, because it's already at the publishers to come out as my second in the series. But when I thought to start launching a series, I thought I needed a bit more skit and donna. So that's why I've got one with pirates in it. And treasure.
I think it's absolutely wonderful. What I found fascinating is about the young lad Tommo. I mean, he is without giving away any of the story, but he is a really mature young man. Do you think that young people who grow up in the bush and have to deal with life very differently, do you think they have a level of maturity that we don't necessarily have when we grow up in cities?
I think they have different strengths, because if you put them in a city, they're a bit lost. Whereas a city kid actually feels quite at home. But in the bush, they're not going to worry about the next spider around the corner, or if they're going to bump into a lion or something, because they've got a better understanding of their environment. I mean, and that applies even if they're just on a farm. There was a story my mother told me when I was about 5 or 6. We went to Mr. Swart's Afrikaner cattle farm, and he took me to see his bull Bliksem. and apparently, as we walked through the gate, I held on to Mr. Swart's hand, and I said, if you're scared, you can hold my hand.
Oh, oh, that's so sweet. So is Tommo you, or is Tommo a boy that you knew, or is it a completely fictional young lad that you created?
No, well, people who know me as Chris Thompson think Tommo is short for Thompson, but it's not. It's a T-O, not a T-H. And it's Thomas Ridgway. No, the reason I came up with Thomas Ridgway, it started as a different book a long time ago, which had other elements in it, which linked it to the Isle of Man, in fact, because I was trying to get a bit of King Arthur and stuff into it, but I decided that was too far removed, so I dropped that end of it. But to get the Thomas Ridgway, the Ridgway was now part of the Pendragon and whatever other names that were coming out. Anyway, so his name stayed, but everything else changed. And having somebody with an affinity with animals comes when you work a lot with animals. I was lucky enough as a kid growing up that I actually was in touch with many animals. We had hedgehogs that came in the garden. We had tortoises. In different gardens, I had mongoose. And in Harare, there are giant rats, which when my wife was digging the garden, she thought she'd come across a snake, but it was actually the tail of the rat that had been buried.
Oh my God, that's so gross.
Yeah, so and then horses, I used to go horse riding, and then we had some donkeys because we had a plot of land outside of Bulawayo. And in those days growing up, the bush around our suburb was just open bush. I think it belonged to the city council. And there was kudu and duiker and steenbok and various other things still running around in those days, even civet cats.
Wow.
And there was a tree that I went with my mates when we used to go up the hill to have a secret smoke with a star cigarette at the age of 5.
We won't tell anyone. We won't tell anyone.
And we used to sit up under a marula tree. And that was a giant because the trees around below are quite short. And this was about 20 foot high. But then we, in season, obviously you can eat marulas, but when it's out of season, there's just the nuts. And that was when we discovered there's actually a very nice nut inside the marula, which is equivalent to, a pecan nut. I mean, it's really good. But you learn those sort of things as a kid growing up. Snot apples, I don't know if you ever ate those. But
no. No, growing up in Joburg, we didn't have snot apples.
Okay. But marulas, snot apples, like monkey oranges, but you had to be careful with those because they had strychnine in. So you had to eat them when they were really ripe.
Wow, so your learning comes, so your knowledge of the bush for Tommo, because Tommo is really astute and he's very clever in how he works things out. So I think from what I can imagine, he's a kid that does really well in maths at school because he's a problem solver, but his knowledge of the bush is exceptional. And does that come from your research, your knowledge, or did you chat to people about all of those details? Because it's really very, very, very astute.
No, it's a combination of them. At one time, one of the things that I did with my mates when we were still in junior school, I can't remember what age, we used to go around collecting snares because snares were being laid in the bush by the locals, and we collected those. And it was while we were collecting those that after a while, we could tell that these were being laid for hares or these were being laid for duikers or whatever. And it was just from looking. Now, at the other end of the extreme, when I was visiting Rukomachi, which is a safari camp in Mana Pools, and I was with a real expert game guide. And we found this drag mark on the ground after we've been looking at some nyala palms which elephants love to eat. We'd in fact been inspecting their poos to see if any nuts had come through, because there's a theory that they will only grow once they pass through an elephant.
Oh.
Anyway, that's an aside. And when we were walking away from that, we found this drag mark of something obviously quite sharp being dragged across the ground. And we followed it for a while. And then when we came through softer bits, we could see where the lion spoor was. And then a bit later on, we saw hyena, and we thought maybe we made a mistake with the lion. And then we realized that the hyena was actually following the lion.
Oh.
And then we also saw another little mark that came periodically of something stabbing into the ground. Anyway, cutting a long story short, what was happening was a lioness who had cubs that were lying in the sandy river of the Rukomachi, had gone and caught itself an impala and was now dragging this back to where the cubs were. So the drag mark was the hind leg, the hoof dragging, and these little stab marks is where the front hoof was bouncing onto the ground after each step. And from that, we learned an awful lot about it before we actually even came up to where the lioness was. And that was an example of how I got to learn some of the things.
Yeah, and also because, I mean, he's very clever in the way he manages certain situations, and he thinks ahead. It's like he's playing chess all the time. How can I make that happen? How can I make that happen? How can I manipulate the environment so that happens? And I think that's what makes it such an interesting read, and a read that I can't put down, because I always have this thing when I read a book that the story's going to carry on without me. So I can't leave it for too long because I don't know what's going to happen without me. So I need to go back and read the book. And that's what I felt about Tommo. So in the first book, is it also Tommo?
Yeah, no, they're all Tommo.
Okay.
And in all of them, he has this affinity with elephants.
But now, so he's going to school in England. So of course, these only take place during his school holidays. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And for the purpose of this book, he's going to a school which only has one holiday a year, and it's a really long one.
It's poetic license. We can do what we like.
Yeah, that's what I found being an author. You can actually create your own world. So he comes out sort of at the end of the rainy season, because the safaris can't normally operate during the rains because the trucks get stuck. And you can't see much anyway because the bush is too thick. So that's when why he comes out then. And then obviously he has to go back eventually. But I try and leave that fairly vague so that nobody can work it out and say, oh, Thompson, what are you doing here? You should have gone back to school. But my youngest son, when he read it, he said, I asked him, how do you enjoy the read? He said, boy, Dad, I wish I could have done all those things when I was a kid.
I also think that the responsibility that he's given as a young boy, I think, is remarkable, and it just shows his maturity. You know, having to take on, representing his uncle in certain circumstances, and I think there's something to be said for the way that we grow up in Africa, where we take responsibility, and it's life and death responsibility. It's not just like, oh, make sure that you have made your bed in the morning. You know, this is real stuff that you have to be responsible for, and you have to grow up very quickly.
Yeah, no, I think that was an important part of this, because you won't find as much on the domestic scene in the book.
No, there's no making of beds.
No. He actually makes in one of the books, he helps set up his tent and his uncle's tent when his uncle is away, and joins him later. But I think that's about as far as it goes. Otherwise, periodically, if he's in a camp on his own in the bush, or the bundu as we call it, then he does make himself some suds, or as you call pup.
Yeah.
But that's about as far as it goes.
So tell me about the process of writing the book. Did the story just come to you and you just started writing, or did it take a long time for the story to come together?
When I started the first one, I had a vague idea, and I started with my vague idea, and it sort of developed as I wrote, which meant periodically whole chapters were discarded and had to start again. When I came to the next book, which in fact was this one, I tried to get a plot going beforehand. So I actually wrote a rough plot.
Okay.
So that, because otherwise you can go off at a tangent, like you can do when you're being interviewed, and you end up not covering what you really wanted to do. And that made it easier, in fact. But I still found that as you're writing it, an idea comes to you which is better than what you thought about before. So you do take a slightly different route through the long grass, and you cross the river at a different place, but you still get there in the end. That's hopefully how it works.
So you kind of planned the end so that you knew the direction you were going. Is that right?
No, not totally, because on this book, pretty much. On this book, at the end, it sort of splits into 3 parts. And in my original thought, it was in 1 part.
Okay. Okay. So the book took on a life of its own, is what you're saying?
Yeah, because you start to think of the mechanics, and is it possible for one kid to do this? No, it isn't. So let's just change it slightly so it does make it more possible.
And so now you finished you've got your draft, and you've got it already on your computer or written by hand. What do you do with it next?
Well, you actually just start at the beginning. And I found that when I was trying to get people interested in the book, I needed a prologue, because you really need some action immediately. But usually with a book, you've got to set the scene, and setting the scene isn't full of exciting things. So I copied Clive Cussler, amongst others, who always has a prologue, which has got a lot of action in it. And then after that, you just back into the real story, and then you move on. And obviously the one has to lead into the other. And that that's often directed where the real story was going. Because I mean, with this particular one, I got so carried away with the prologue, it was just about to become a book. And so I had to go back and severely edit it to just a chapter. In fact,
It's so good because it really does grab you, the prologue. I love it. And then suddenly it takes you into the bush and you're like, oh, now how is this going to all interweave? Like, how is it going to bring it back to the prologue, which was, I think, the real art of your writing, is to weave it back into what the relevance was of the prologue, which I thought was amazing. So the prologue didn't feature as much in the story at the beginning, is what you're saying.
Yeah, because I started the book and then I came back and then did the prologue, but I knew there was going to be a prologue, which was more or less on the lines which it came out to be.
Yeah. So how do you then start getting people to help you with the publishing and all of that? I mean, that's a tricky one as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I actually went on quite a few things. Firstly, the Isle of Man had a sort of an artists get together to talk about writing books, and they had invited some experts from the UK and elsewhere. And at that first one, I took along the first few drafts of my original pangolin poaching one to a lady who really obviously wrote romantic novels. And she was not interested in my book at all. And so that was a bit disheartening. But then I realized, because I then read one of her books, I didn't like her book either. So we were on different planets. So that's why I understand why somebody like J.K. Rowling went to so many different publishers to get the first one published.
I'll tell you who finally gave her the break is the town that I live in. There's a publisher for children's books called Chicken House.
Okay.
And that was the man who eventually gave her the go-ahead. So I'm very proud of Chicken House here in Frome in Somerset.
Okay, well, I was interested to see the first publishing, or the print run, was for 300, I think, most of which went to libraries. So when I read that, I then went and dished out to the libraries here. But I think the amount of reading done by my age group is a problem. I really have to get parents to tell their children, read a book and get off that mobile phone.
Yeah.
And stop playing a game.
Well, this is way more interesting. So anybody who is stuck on a device of some sort, this book is so much more fun than a game. I'm telling you, it's way more fun.
Okay, well, I just need that passed on to to my target market.
So who finally then said to you, okay, I'm ready to take this, and why do you think they were ready to work with you in the publication?
Well, there it was a self-publish. I went to a whole lot there. If you go onto the web, there's dozens and dozens of people can help you self-publish, and a lot of them end up would make more money than you do, because you're actually paying them to get it up and running, but then they start taking royalties. And I found somebody that didn't. You'll see on the book there, it's got
Michael Terrence.
Terrence Publishing, yeah. So that's who I used. And they just charged a flat fee for which they would get it onto Amazon. So it's on Kindle and it's on Amazon as a paperback. And with Amazon as a paperback, you only print what you order. So it's unlike when you go through litho printing, which the Collins and those guys do on a big scale. You have to produce thousands before it makes it economical. And if it doesn't take off, you're stuck with a whole lot of books that nobody wants.
For the rest of your life in the garage.
Yeah.
So you're writing. So what was your background that you ended up wanting to write? And because I think that there's a real connection in the jobs that you've done in the past.
Yeah, with the interesting link is I actually I did zoology at university.
Okay.
But in my university vacs, I worked with a chap called Viv Wilson, who ran Chipangali outside Bulawayo.
Okay.
He had been with the national parks in Zambia, And when he wasn't getting his support to protect the animals there, he then moved further south. And he was in national parks in Zim. And I was actually working for him when he was based in the National Museum in Bulawayo. And there's another little story on that I can cover. I was talking about snakes, but anyway, I can come back to that. And many discussions with him. And he had got divorced because his wife couldn't handle him being out in the sticks all the time. She wanted a little bit of, the gay life, or even just civilization. So he said, be very careful if you want to get involved in this, because there's no money in it, and you are antisocial. Because I had actually applied when I was 16 to join the game department. And I was offered a job at this place called Mana Pools. And in those days, I'd never heard of it. And I got a map of Zimbabwe or Rhodesia out. And I found it was on the Zambezi, 100 miles from the nearest little dorp. And you were in for 3 months, and then you came out for 2 weeks. And then you had a 7-day week for 3 months, and you came out and given a 2-week holiday. And at 16, I enjoyed rock and roll. And I decided that no, that was too dedicated, but I would do it when I got older, you see. And that was when Bill Wilson said, if you couldn't do it then, you're probably not going to be able to do it later.
Wise man. So
I then dropped it, and I thought, what I'll do, I'll join the Tetsi department, because one of the things that was I didn't like that was happening was somebody came up with the bright ideas to stop Tetsi from flies from spreading. You make a big corridor between where the wild game are and the farming is, and then you shoot everything that moves. And so thousands of animals and birds were being shot, or animals. It was only later they found out that Tetsi flies affect birds too.
Mm.
And so the fences weren't going to stop birds, and then warthogs dig under the fences. So the whole thing was actually a complete waste of time, but a lot of animals died in the process. So that's why I was keen to join them, because they had come up with this idea with having traps where they'd sterilize the males and then they'd release the males, and then the number of tsetse flies would diminish, which worked pretty well. So you built a corridor between. So that was how I got involved on that side of it. But to the extent of getting involved with Tetsi, I was then going to join them, but I had to wait 6 months before they were re-employing people. So I had from January when I finished at university to June to kill. And I saw an advert in the paper looking for a copywriter for commercial television. Now, I'd never heard who commercial television was, and I didn't know what a copywriter was. But I phoned them up, and they sort of gave me an idea. So I went in and had an initial interview in which I was then tasked to write an advert. And it was to write an advert for Regal beer. And we had to bring it back in a week's time. So I wrote a jingle, hence why I still write songs. But I can't write music. So, it's a case of I hum it, you play it, and then you tell me what notes we sing. Anyway, through that, I got the job. And it was working with commercial television, which was the sales and marketing division of RTV. And I enjoyed it so much that I stayed. And I never went to apply for the Tetsi job at all.
So did you write then continuously for work, but did you start writing fiction then, or has the fiction only come later on?
Oh, no, that came much later. The fiction actually started on the Isle of Man.
Okay.
Otherwise, it was the textbook and the memoirs. And the memoirs weren't fiction, although they might sound like fiction.
That's when you know you've had a fantastic life.
Yeah.
So this is a fictional place where Tommo is, but where would you say it kind of is situated in Africa?
Okay, well, I didn't want to locate it with any place where somebody could find PC problems. So it is a combination. It's sort of southern central Africa, but it has a coast.
Yeah.
So it's not Mozambique, it's not Zimbabwe, it's not Botswana, it's not Zambia, it's not Tanzania. It's sort of a bit of all of it. So
Wow.
when I want a river, I've got the Zambezi, which is now the Katanga River. And if you can remember, Katanga was a province of the Congo.
Okay.
So anyway, it come away from there. But so it's a bit of a mixture of all things. And where
Ah,
possible, I've introduced a couple of Swahili words, so you're not too sure if this where this person is. But there's also a couple of sort of Zulu words, Ndebele words.
and I love the name of the mechanic.
Oh yeah, fix it.
Fix it. Fantastic. That's exactly it. So you have obviously some wonderful memories of growing up in Africa. Are any of these woven in to your stories? Have you tried to bring them in?
To a certain extent. There was a time when they introduced, they stopped people from shooting crocodiles in Kariba, but they were crocodile farmers, and they were allowed to do it only on the understanding they released a certain amount of their 4-foot crocs back into the river. But as a result of that, there's now an awful lot more crocodiles than there ever were in history. And it was pointed out to me by a pilot in a light plane. He was flying over, and he says, if you fly over and you see these houseboats crossing Kariba, they've nearly all got a tail of crocodiles following, hoping that somebody's going to throw a fish overboard. So you don't want to go swimming in the middle, because a lot of people thought, oh, there's no crocs in the middle. There are crocodiles in the middle.
Oh,
But
wow.
we were tied up one night. We were actually on a shoot for this hotel chain, which I'd mentioned with Chabalala. And one of the guys in the agency, because I've now moved from a broadcasting to an ad agency, whereas I was a director. And we were on his boat, and we were sleeping on the top because it gets so hot there. It's better to sleep on the top. And in the middle of the night, I needed to go and visit a little bush in the land. So I went to step over, but they had a diesel drum which had a little leak in it. Not a big one, but when I stepped on that before getting onto the ladder, I slipped. So I fell from the top of this boat, which has got several tiers, and I landed in the water. Now, we had every night been flashing torches around. You could see all these red eyes, because these were crocodiles. So when I was falling down, there was a rope that held the canopy on the top deck. And I tried grabbing onto that, but it was nylon and it was thinner than my finger.
Oh.
So all I managed to do was burn my hand, palm of my hand. And I hit the water with a mighty splash. And I was out that boat. I don't know how I raised it, came up 4 foot. Because, and I was back on the boat before the first person came out to see what had happened. And they said, what happened? I said, I fell in. They said, no, you can't do, you're out only on the water. I said, I came out fast. So they teased me a lot because I kept saying I can't see any crocodiles in this particular spot.
There were thousands.
Yeah.
I want to know what your plans are now. So you've written 2 in the series, haven't you?
3.
3 already. Okay, so this was number 2.
So that's number 2. The next one coming, which is the pangolins, it was the first one I wrote. And then because nowhere had I introduced how the elephant whisperer got his name, I then wrote chronologically the first book.
Oh, well, the movies do that. Star Wars goes back in time. Everyone goes back in time. So, you're in with a trend.
And so that first book starts with an El Nino type problem, which if anybody lives in Africa, you know what the effect that has. And so now you have drought. So that opens up with the drought problem. And from there, we need to drill boreholes. And from there, the story carries on.
And then, so you've also written a textbook, I believe. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Oh, the textbook, that was the advertising thing. That was this one.
And how did that come about? Did you just feel that there's resources that were lacking for young people or people studying advertising?
Yeah, when I was chairman of the Advertising Media Association, we used to we started a course. I thought it was necessary to start a course to train new people coming into the industry the ropes, because a lot of people were being given quite senior positions but didn't know what was what. So we started this course. Originally, I wanted to make it a full-on diploma 3-year course, but we didn't have the wherewithal all the people to do that. So we started it as sort of a half-yearly, so it was a sort of 6-month course. And I used people who are in the industry. So we used full-time copywriters to talk about copywriting. We got media managers to talk about media placement and so on. And at the end of it, I gave a talk on putting the whole lot together and presenting a campaign. So that's what it was all about. So it worked pretty well with the quality of lecturers I had. But as the economy in Zimbabwe deteriorated, so the standard of my lecturers went down. Until one day we were marking the papers and everybody was getting the same wrong answer for this question. We realized they'd been told the wrong information. So by then I had left the broadcasting side and I was now in advertising, and I was chairman of that lot. So I then said to the association, I said, we need a book. And they said, good idea, Chris.
And you can write it. Go, Chris, go write it.
Go write it, yeah, basically. Anyway, there was a lady that I knew quite well who had actually typed up all the lecturers' notes. And I thought it'd be easy. I'll just take their notes and I'll just expand them a little bit and put them together neatly. And that'll be the book. But then I found that a lot of them was really just bullet points. And just to give, the guy knew what he was talking about. So he just said, say rainbow. And then that was how he was going to talk about the colors that you use in an advert.
Okay. So you just gave it some flesh.
So I had to flesh it out. In fact, that ended up taking me about 6 months to write that thing. And whilst I was writing that one, which was hard yards, I used to take a break periodically, and then I wrote my memoirs, my childhood memoirs, which started.
So what are the plans for those?
Well, I don't know. Memoirs are sort of a bit of an ecological, I mean, not ecological. You know, you're blowing your own trumpet a bit, really, I suppose. So I don't see it as being, you know, it's not like I'm Winston Churchill or somebody, everybody.
Not yet.
Anyway, so I might do something, but I'll probably do a little bit for the family. So, you know, Grandpa can be remembered as, these are the things that he did in his day, because people don't do what I did in my day.
No.
I mean, some of the things we did with the neighbor next door, we made movies. And it started with just a movie of the local fair. And then we did the Dynamite Dentist. And I was the dentist, and some poor other guy was the victim. And we kept pulling all, it looked like we were pulling all his teeth out, and we finally used dynamite to get rid of this tooth. But to do that, we actually made some gunpowder, which blew up. And that's when I learned that gunpowder really isn't explosive unless you compress it.
Well, you've got to learn it some way, don't you? You have to learn it somehow. So playing around with it. Yes, I agree that we've had a really interesting time growing up in Africa. And I think it's made us richer people, but it's also made us rounded. And I think we see the world completely differently. Oh, yeah. So the Isle of Man is a very different location. Tell me about what life is like on the Isle of Man.
Well, you were speaking to Dawn, and she sort of introduced me to you guys. And one of our sons is here, and that's why we ended up here. I mean, it's a lovely little island, but it is a little island. And every time you want to go anywhere, you've got to cost you to get off the island to connect with something else, which is one of the downsides. But the better part of it is 80,000 people here. There's not 66 million. And this at the 5 o'clock traffic is still a problem, though.
Oh, I'm sure.
because the roads here were designed for sort of cart and horse. And I think they were designed, they went from front door to front door of the various farmhouses. So they sort of zigzag across the island. But no, it's a very nice place to be in.
And is it quite rich culturally? Is there lots going on?
Oh yeah, from a historical point of view, it was originally, I believe, from stuff I've read, it was inhabited after the Ice Age from people from Ireland first, and then as history developed, then the Vikings got involved, because this is when they were branching out, and Dublin became a major slave trading center. And so they needed a place that they could actually put their boats, and the Isle of Man, right in the middle of the Irish Sea, was a good spot to be. Because now they could go raiding monasteries over there and catch slaves over here and steal gold from over there. Anyway, and then they actually didn't really mess around with Isle of Man, because this was they made this their base. So they sort of got together with the locals. And so, an awful lot of people here are very proud to say they've got a Viking connection, although they're still also proud to be Celtic.
Well, I'm a Viking, so I'm very proud of that. My family comes from Northern England, and I had my DNA done a few years ago, and I'm very proud of being a Viking. I always wanted to be a Viking. I was very excited.
Well, the Vikings got around. I mean, I think the most amazing thing, a lot of people don't know, that they were known when they were going into Asia as the Rus. And that's where Russia gets its name from.
Okay.
Yeah, so,
wow. That's lovely. I love that kind of those kind of trivia tales.
Yeah.
So the writing now, you've got your textbook, you've got your Tommo series. If somebody said to you, I really have a story in my mind, but I really don't know if I can write, what would your advice be?
Well, I think you don't know until you've given it a go. And even if you just write drivel and gibberish for a while, and write about something you know about.
Okay.
That's why it's been easy for me to write about Tommo in Katangwa. But when I've been looking at, because it's not that easy to sell Tommo here, I thought, well, I'll write a Viking adventure. Now suddenly find I don't know much about Vikings. Why did they leave? And do they have just, I mean, I've seen their boat in Oslo, but it turns out they got about 4 different types of boats. And there were different reasons why they left and all these sort of things. So you've got to study all of that before you can even write the first sentence. Otherwise, you're going to have all the experts saying, oh, this is nonsense.
Yeah.
So write about what you know. And even if it's rubbish, you must write. Even if the next day you come back and you read it. And that's where I found it helped a lot. I'd write something and I wouldn't stop and try and edit it as I was writing it, because that's soul destroying. So you'd write it, spelling mistakes, bad grammar, and rubbishy sentences, and even the story line itself might be useless. But then the next day you come back and you read what you did the day before. And then you do a certain amount of editing and fixing it then. And that actually then puts you in the mood for writing the next chapter or the next few paragraphs or whatever it is.
So do you write at a specific time of the day, or do you just whenever the mood takes you and when the creativity comes?
No, you normally have to try and get into some sort of a routine. And I know a lot of these people sort of say, well, I write from this hour to that hour, and then I go for a walk, and then I go and do this. I can't do that because I've never been an early morning person. I mean, when I was at work, my staff used to say, well, don't talk to Chris until 10. Because he's a miserable bugger. And whereas some people are really good at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
So it's up to the individual. And sometimes you blank.
Mm.
You know before you even sit down that today I just can't think of that because I've actually got my mind on something else or whatever. Or I'm just being thick, or well, all I can do is sit and watch TV. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So now Tommo's going to have to grow up. isn't he?
No,
I
that's
mean,
the problem. Well, Harry Potter is still surviving. I don't know how old.
yeah, that's a good point,
The
actually,
actor is
because I'm
probably in his
thinking,
20s now.
how many school holidays does Tommo have? You know, from 14 to 18, I suppose, and then it could be university holidays, maybe.
Well, I don't know. I just remember reading Famous Five.
I
And
read,
they never
I
seem,
read.
yeah, they never seem to leave Form 1.
That's a good point, actually. So
But I didn't
Tommo's
bother.
going to live forever.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it at the moment.
Okay, good. Well,
Eventually,
that's
I will probably get tired of him being this age. And I mean, because one guy who read it, he says, Chris, I like your book, but it needs more S and V. And I said, he's too young for the S. And the V has got to have its limits.
So for people who don't know much about Tommo, do you want to just give us a little kind of an overview of who Tommo is, how old he is, and the kind of person he is, without obviously giving too much of the story away?
Yeah, well, the idea is Tommo is sort of Peter Pan 14. And in one of the books, he gets his driver's license early because it was convenient for him to be able to drive around the national park.
Yeah.
So he got a national park license. So that gives him an age, but I didn't want to wait till he turned 16 or 18 or whatever.
But so many people grew up on a farm driving a tractor very early, you know, so I don't think it's too far from the truth, really.
Oh, no. I mean, with my friends, we had a guy with 20 acres just out of Bulawayo, and we had a Morris Minor, Morris 10, which we drove when we were 12. And so we drove it all around this 20 acres. We didn't drive it outside of the 20 acres, and we finally sold it because we couldn't afford to buy a new battery.
Oh, how funny is that?
Anyway,
so Tommo gets his license really young, so he's really responsible for driving. And what kind of a person is he?
Okay, so I tried very hard not to make him too much of a goody-goody wussy type. But also he wasn't going to be Superboy. So he gets scared, but he overcomes those things, hopefully. He makes mistakes, but not too often. He gets into trouble because he's done something that he probably shouldn't have done. But as you said, he works his way out through the problems, and he tries to use his brain rather than brawn when he's up against the heavies. And that's one area where the elephants prove very useful for him. We won't go into too much of that. People have got to read the book for that one.
Yes, absolutely.
And he's at school. That's to keep him out of the way during the rainy season. And also
far away in England.
Well, that's also so he can learn sort of things which kids in the Western society learn about. Like he's got a mobile phone, but there's no mobile link in the Katanga Valley. So he uses it as a camera when he's back home. But presumably he uses it, I don't know, because I haven't met him when he's been in England.
The Adventures of Tommo in England, that just wouldn't be the same.
No, it wouldn't be the same, no.
No.
Yes, and he's an orphan. And his parents were studying guerrillas in the Congo, I think, when they got caught up with a internecine warfare and they got killed. And it might have been poachers, in fact, that bumped them off. And that's why he's now living with his uncle. Because I didn't, at one time in the first book, I had his mother there. And I was told, little boys don't want to read about kids and their mothers are always there. So I'm afraid she got bumped off.
That's the beauty of writing. You can just bump people off easily. It's great.
So that's basically where Tommo fits in. So he gets.
And I think that's also, his maturity also comes from having to fend for himself in a lot of ways emotionally because he's an orphan.
Yeah. His uncle isn't much older than him. Sometimes they're taken as brothers. Now that was taken is my nephew, because I had a sister who was a lot older than me because of her mother died. And then, so my mother was the second wife. And there was a 12-year difference in our ages.
Okay.
And so if I add 12 years onto Tommo, that's sort of the age of his uncle.
Absolutely lovely. So is there anything finally you'd like to share before we end off, Chris?
I don't know, we run out of time and things, I think, about most things. Oh, there was one thing that there was, I can't remember what it is now, but yeah.
We can come back and chat about your next book.
Yeah, we can cover that in the next one. It was oh yes, sorry, there was one story of these various line things. There was a woman who worked at RTV who was a PA to the administrator, but in her own capacity, she was a city councillor. And she went to investigate a farm outside Harare because the city council were looking for somewhere they could take dignitaries to get a quick look at some wild animals. And they were being entertained on the veranda at this place where they were at. And while they were all sitting around this refectory table, the pet lion wandered around and selected her out of all these people sitting there, and she was in the middle of the bunch, grabbed her head, pulled her off the seat she was on and dragged her off the veranda into the lawn. And everyone was so gobsmacked that only her son, who was about 20-something, ran after her, and he's now flapping his serviette napkin in the lion's face to try and get him to release. And then, of course, the owner of the place, he got together and he sorted it all out. But when she came back to work a few days later, they shaved her head off, and then putting in stitches and stuff. She looked a real mess. But the lion had actually been very gentle. It just pierced the skin, not the skull.
Oh my God, what a story. Those African stories, people would think that, like you said, I mean, it sounds fictional, yeah. And actually this is real life.
No, it was real.
Amazing, amazing. So Chris, people can go onto Amazon if they're in the UK, if they're anywhere internationally, they can get the Kindle version. You said it was on Kindle.
Yeah, it's Kindle. So the Kindle is actually easier to find straight away. And I think where I was having problems here tracking it down was because of COVID, because I kept getting not available. And I think they didn't say it's not available because of ABC.
Yeah.
But it's now available. I checked last night.
Okay, great. We'll pop the link with this. Yeah. I highly recommend this book. And I know, so the target audience, what's the age that you kind of wanted for the target audience?
Well, it's sort of from 10 upwards. But having said that, there's a lady from South Africa who's reading it to her kids, and the youngest one, I think, was about 7, and they loved it.
And you know what? I'm way older than 10, and I absolutely love this book. I think it's a book that actually adults will enjoy as much. What I loved about your language, Chris, is that I could hear my mother, because my mother's of your generation, and I could hear my mother's language in how you wrote. So there was something very, it was so heartwarming, because it's not modern kind of jargony talk. It's just beautiful. I absolutely love it. And I think this is one of the best books I think I could recommend to anybody, because I think it gives you a real insight into Africa, and it's heartwarming. It's exciting. There's something going around every corner. Something's going to happen. But also, there was a reassurance for me that nothing bad was going to happen to Tommo. Like, I kind of knew when he was taking a chance, but it was almost like I had so much faith in this young boy. I was like, you can do it, Tommo. Nothing's bad's going to happen. You've got your radio, or they know where you are, whatever, and I just thought it was very beautifully written. And I love the language that you use writing this book. It's got a beautiful flow. So I highly recommend it to anybody, really, children, adults, teenagers, and I think it's wonderful. So thank you very much for sharing it with us.
Thank you. The next book's going to have a glossary.
Wow.
because my son in the UK kept asking his dad, what does this word mean? What does this word mean? I said, don't your kids learn English anymore? So I was told, put a glossary in next time.
How funny. That's really great. But thank you so much for sharing your insights, your story, and most importantly, telling us a bit more about your books, because I think everyone who's from Southern Africa and anyone who wants to introduce somebody to Southern Africa needs to share this book and read it.
Thanks, Dawn. Lovely talking to you.
Lovely talking to you.
Bye-bye.